Let us pray. O Lord, our governor, bless the leaders of our land, that we may be a people at peace among ourselves and a blessing to other nations of the earth. Lord, keep this nation under your care. To the Prime Minister and members of the Cabinet, and all the administrative authority, grant wisdom and grace in the exercise of their duties. Give grace to your servants, O Lord. To the member of this House and those who make our laws, give courage, wisdom, and foresight to provide for the needs of all our people and to fulfill our obligations in the community of nations. Give grace to your servants, O Lord. And finally, Lord, teach us and teach your people to rely on your strength and accept their responsibilities to their fellow citizens. They may elect trustworthy leaders and make wise decisions for the well-being of our society. They may serve you faithfully in our generation and ought to the honor of your holy name. Through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. Say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
This House is in session. Minutes for the meeting held on Tuesday, August 10th, 2021 to be confirmed.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the aforesaid minutes be confirmed.
The question is that the aforementioned minutes be confirmed. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting, the ayes have it. The aforementioned minutes are hereby confirmed. Minutes for the meeting held on Tuesday, August 24th, 2021 to be deferred.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the aforesaid minutes be deferred.
The question is that the aforementioned minutes be deferred. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting, the ayes have it. The aforementioned minutes are hereby deferred.
Announcements by Your Honor the Speaker.
I am in receipt of the report of the Auditor General on the financial statements of the Government of Barbados 2018 to 2019.
Messages from Her Excellency the Governor General, petitions, papers, and government notices.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice of a resolution to grant the sum of $126,999,726 from the Consolidated Fund and to place it at the disposal of the government to supplement the estimates 2021 to 2022 as shown in the supplementary estimates number 3, 2021-2022.
Private members' notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills, statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motions for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42, subsection 5, 43, and 44 for the remainder of the day's sitting.
The question is that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are hereby suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting.
Government business, sir.
Government business is the order of the day.
Order number 5. In the name of the Honourable Minister of Energy, Small Business and Entrepreneurship, to move the second reading of the National Vending Bill 2021.
Honourable Member for St. James Central.
I'm obliged, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise today to pilot a bill in which effectively, Mr. Speaker, this Honourable House and the members of this House gathered here are privileged to honour a date with the destiny of the people that we represent. Mr. Speaker, sir, in principle, we come here to do two things. First of all, to decriminalize working class enterprise in this country. And secondly, Mr. Speaker, sir, to create a body of rights for practitioners of working class enterprise where no such body of rights has existed throughout the course of the history of this island. And Mr. Speaker, sir, there are those who have occupied seats in this parliament, sent to this place by the people of Barbados throughout the course of our history of the existence of a parliament, wheresoever that parliament has been located, and howsoever it has been comprised. And hundreds, literally, of them, if not thousands, Mr. Speaker, have gone to the great beyond. I think it would be true to say that the vast, in fact, the overwhelming majority of them would turn in their graves to hear it said on the floor of this place, falling from the lips of a minister responsible for the internal commerce of this country, that he has come here to decriminalize working class commercial enterprise and to create a body of rights for practitioners of such enterprise. In fact, Mr. Speaker, sir, I am going to go further. I suspect that there are even amongst us alive and well today a few who are sufficiently, perhaps, misguided, I am tempted to say perverse in their thinking, that they too, as I utter the words that I just uttered, would be in a situation where they're alive, so they can't turn in the grave. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, sir, they may well have lost control over bodily function and gone to relieve themselves at the nearest place situate for such activity. But I must say, Mr. Speaker, that this Minister of Commerce makes no apology for beginning on that note. I, sir, view society through a lens of investigative research. I see society, Mr. Speaker, sir, and history as being empirical facts that have been impacted, Mr. Speaker, by material realities. That lens of historical materialism tells me that history has been shaped in such a way, and current events have been shaped in such a way, and continue as I speak to be shaped in such a way, that it is inevitable that this country would have had to honor this date with destiny sooner or later. I suspect, sir, sooner rather than later. The shame is that we have not done so previously. But, Mr. Speaker, sir, one of the challenges in a small economy and in a small society such as this has to be that we maintain stability of the country. And, Mr. Speaker, It is a testimony to the patience of the people of Barbados, especially the working class people of Barbados, that they have toiled and that they have patiently waited for this day to come when the Parliament, which represents or should be representing their interests, sees fit to do right and to do the just things by them. And so therefore, Mr. Speaker, sir, what we are doing today is dismantling perhaps 333 years, sir, of the last remaining vestiges of British slave economy. Now, sir, again, there are those people who go into a state of panic when once you use the word slave in any sentence in this day and age. And I make no apology for doing that either, because there is a historical reality that is unfolding before us today. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, sir, that Barbados was a prototype within which the British perfected a slave economy. There is a difference, sir, between a slave system. There's a difference between a slave system, sir, and a slave society. A society that has any slaves is a slave society. A system of slavery is a slave system. But an economy, a structure, Mr. Speaker, sir, within which people were not just subjugated and dehumanized, but even more importantly, sir, they were regulated by an economic architecture, a body of laws and regulations which were specifically designed, specifically planned out, mapped out, and coordinated, sir, so as to constrain commerce among a specific set of this community, so as to restrain and constrain commercial impulse among a specific set of the community, Mr. Speaker, sir, that you criminalize the very impulse, not only the activity, but the inclination to have the activity. That is the prototype that was perfected in this country, the slave economy of Barbados, and then transplanted across the Caribbean and even into the colonies of North America. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is true, therefore, to say that one of the legacy assets of this Parliament, over which you now have the honor to preside, is the history of repression and oppression, and yes, sir, suppression of commercial development of black people, of working class people. And an ironclad effort was made, sir, to repress and oppress the commercial impulse of the people who we represent. And as I said, we are dismantling 333 years of the history of that. And I'm going to go into some detail because there are those who have become giddy-headed and intoxicated by the passage, by the effluxion of time, and they feel, Mr. Speaker, sir, that all is well because to some extent they have disconnected themselves from the reality that still speaks every day to the life, the daily existence of segments of this society. By coming here, sir, to decriminalize the practice of vending in Barbados and creating a body of rights for the community of vending entrepreneurs in this country, Mr. Speaker, sir, we are taking a necessary step which takes us down the road of repairing some of the iniquities of history. I may have hinted at it just now, but let me expatiate a little bit more. It is my judgment, sir, as Minister of Commerce, that one of the tragedies of the post-independence era, the 55 years since we were independent, sir, since we broke the yoke, as they say, of colonial bondage, was that no administration elected by the people of Barbados has had the courage to come to this Parliament to speak truth to the people who sent us here. And the fact is, Mr. Speaker, sir, that the only area of legitimate economic activity, the only area of legitimate commercial activity in Barbados that is regulated only by criminal sanction and criminal penalty is the area of vending. I want you to think it through, Mr. Speaker, sir, because you, like I, a member of a profession. In our case, it is the legal profession. They have been members of our profession, Mr. Speaker, sir, and I don't seek to cast aspersion on any individual or individuals, but I speak only because it is colliding with the truth. They are members of the legal profession who have seen fit in the course of their practice to misappropriate funds. And the issue was resolved not by way of criminal sanction, but by way of civil administration through a bar association, sir. But that is just a fancy way of saying that somebody money get teeth, but it was dealt with without having to go before the law court. They are members, Mr. Speaker, sir, of the medical profession. Again, I don't speak ill of distinguished medical practitioners in this country, but I collide with truth and historical fact, who, Mr. Speaker, through medical negligence or other types of behavior, have caused severe injury to patients. They are not dealt with as a rule, Mr. Speaker, sir, by way of criminal sanction, but through a civil structure which allows for them to be disciplined by a body of their peers. And let us forget about all the other professions, because it is true of all of them: nurses, teachers, priests, everybody, Mr. Speaker, sir. None of them are visited by criminal penalty and criminal sanction as of right. That may be an avenue that can be pursued, but there are other avenues open to dealing with them. If we talk about trades, Mr. Speaker, sir, and vocation, electrical wiremen, for example, there's no criminal sanction that automatically visits upon them. If we speak about security guards, Mr. Speaker, sir, there's no criminal sanction that automatically visits upon them. Mr. Speaker, sir, the only masons, carpenters, welders, plumbers, you can go on and on through all the occupations, people who run nursing homes in Barbados, Mr. Speaker. But the regulatory framework that governs the pursuit of vending in Barbados is directly descended from and continues to reflect all of the characteristics of the ancient plantation hegemony in this country. And that is what we have come here to dismantle today, Mr. Speaker, sir. And what are the consequences of that structure? Because it's all right to stand here as Minister of Commerce and say that, but it's sometimes necessary for those who hear. I am not sure how many may be listening, but there are those who will listen and who will be able to say that which they heard and invite their neighbor, and invite the person sitting in the pew next to them on Sunday, and invite their children during the course of tonight, and invite, Mr. Speaker, sir, the person at the shop to reflect on it. What is the consequence of criminal sanction on a vendor, sir? That he, without a license, was on Chamberlain Bridge selling fruits in order to feed his 5 sons and 3 daughters. What is the cause, Mr. Speaker, sir, of the criminal penalty attached to him? Unlike you, sir, he can't show up at the U.S. Embassy to get a visa to go anywhere. Mr. Speaker, sir, he cannot get a loan from a bank. He, sir, because of the criminal penalty attached to him, finds it extremely difficult to get a job because he can't get a clean certificate of character, because his character is besmirched by virtue of the fact that he was trying to earn a living in a legitimate enterprise to feed his children, but did not have a valid license. So his living is forfeit. His job opportunity is forfeit, Mr. Speaker. He can't even get a reference letter. You understand that, sir? Not even a letter of reference that can say by way of attestation, this man is of unblemished character. And as a member of parliament, I have had to work around that construct to say that though this person is known to the law, I, as the MP for St. James Central, know him or her to be a person who is industrious. I know him or her to be a person who is hardworking. I know him or her to be a person who is principled, who goes to church every Sunday, who look after the old people in the community. Mr. Speaker, sir, because you're trying to work around a reality that that person collided with a law, a legislative framework, which has existed and haunted him and his ancestral line for 333 years in this country, but was never seen fit to be corrected until this perhaps most progressive of post-independence regimes came into office in service of the people of Barbados in order to correct the wrongs and the injustices of the past. This, perhaps, most progressive of all the administrations that have governed this country and been elected by the people. This one here. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, these are matters of tall importance. As I said to you, the challenge of any government must be economic justice in this country, in this post-emancipation Barbados, and in this post-independent Barbados. And the quest for justice cannot, in my judgment, be compromised. I take a certain element of personal pride, Mr. Speaker, sir, in being part of an administration that understands the importance of this step that we are taking. I take a tremendous amount of pride, Mr. Speaker, sir, in being part of a government that, if I could echo the words of the Minister of Labour, and indeed the Prime Minister, is prepared to do the right thing by way of defending the working class people of Barbados in accordance with a philosophical principle that it is never a wrong time or a bad time to do the right thing. We demonstrated that, sir, with the Minimum Wage Act, and where we intervened to do the right thing. We demonstrated that, sir, with the Liquor Licenses Act, where we intervened once again to remove criminal penalties that stretch all the way back to ancient plantation economy in this country. And Mr. Speaker, sir, we come here again to do the right thing by the people that we represent in order to break a stranglehold on black enterprise that has been written into the laws of this country and remain unbroken for generations past. To understand the magnitude, sir, however, of the New Deal that we are proposing to bring to the people, and that is what it is, sir. It is a new deal. And to understand the magnitude of the New Deal that we are proposing to offer to vendors by way of this legislation, and to understand the magnitude of the stranglehold that has existed around the necks of commercial enterprise in Barbados, black working class commercial enterprise. Let me be specific, because I don't extend to every type of commercial enterprise, or even Mr. Speaker, sir, the reality is there is a segment of this society, if you were to draw a triangle and you stratify, look at the stratification of Barbadian society. The elite at the top for 333 years have looked the same way. And the ones at the base of that social stratification structure have looked the same way. Two unbroken parts of that pyramid, however the middle change up, Mr. Speaker, sir, the bottom and the top has remained unchanged for 333 years. 333. It's an important number because this parliament came to understand 333 to mean $3.33 million that disappeared under the last administration. That's what this parliament came to understand. 333 in this going down, in this particular going down, Mr. Speaker, sir, 333 ain't got none disappearing from a law office to gain somebody place of business, and you can't find out who moved it or how it moved or when it moved, sir. None of that. This 333, and they remain unapologetic to this day. There's a lady who keeps noise up in the north, walking about keeping a lot of noise in the north, sir, who was heard to defend it. And to this day, don't apologize for it. But we will get to that particular lady in due course. But Mr. Speaker, sir, 333 here It's about 333 years of oppression that is being rectified by this effort. And to understand the magnitude of what we're trying to do, sir, I must confess, sir, that I have to ask your indulgence so that I can roll back a little bit of the frontiers of history. Now, sir, in the year 1960, a publication was done by two professors of history, one by the name of Douglas Hall, and I think he is sufficiently famous, sir, that you don't have to be a historian to know of him. He is a man who has published extensively. And another one, Professor Sidney Mintz. And they published an anthropological work, Mr. Speaker, sir, which is entitled, it is published by Yale University, and entitled Origins of the Internal Marketing System in Jamaica. Though it speaks about Jamaica in its title, however, it is really a comparative analysis of the internal marketing structures of certain islands in the Caribbean. What do I mean by internal marketing structures? These societies of which we are part, Barbados being one of them, sir, were slave economies. The model was perfected here, transplanted elsewhere. But within the slave economy, Mr. Speaker, sir, there was a system that evolved where marketing took place even among the slaves. And I can come back to that. But the important point that is made by Professor Mintz, and he made it again in another publication of his called Men, Women, and Trade, a similar comparative analysis, sir, is that you look at Antigua and you look at Barbados, and they stand out because they are both small, they are both flat, and they were highly arable lands for the purposes of sugar. And Mr. Speaker, sir, the planters allocated land. Planters had to allocate land, obviously, for sugar production because that's what they were in business to do. But they were confronted with a dilemma because you still had to feed the slave. Though property, the slave must still be fed. If he is not fed, he or she cannot work. And so, Mr. Speaker, sir, the reality is that they were confronted with a situation as to say, to what extent and to what degree do I impinge upon lands and areas that could be more profitably dedicated to the planting of cane in order to feed these people? Well, they didn't view us as people, but in order to feed that body of labor that they had imported forcibly from the African continent. And Mr. Speaker, sir, the feeding of enslaved persons by sole reliance on food imports, or the alternative would have been, the alternative to the sole reliance on food imports would have been to allow for the slave community to have access to percentages of the arable land in order to plant for themselves and to grow food. Now, this is where it all began. And again, because it is connected to, you know, we hear nowadays like loose talk of international trade and international trade rules without understanding where it all finds its genesis. Back then, Mr. Speaker, sir, the consideration existed that if you're relying on a chain of supply to bring in the food to feed the slave, you were in jeopardy of not being able to have an efficiently run plantation because there were intermittent conflicts in Europe over which you have no control. There was a set of navigation laws governing the Atlantic Ocean and the passage of the Atlantic Ocean, and from time to time, France would get a little punksy and fight up with the English. From time to time, the Portuguese would get a little punksy and fight up with the English. And Mr. Speaker, sir, they would break the chain of supply, and therefore the ability to feed your slaves was uncertain and it was unpredictable. The alternative to that was very attractive. Have some local production done, and therefore it was more reliable and less costly in order to make sure that African labor was able to be fed and continue to work and brutalize that free labor from Africa. That was what it was. It wasn't any humane consideration. It was about making sure that the free labor that you had that you imported and then in some cases forcibly interbred, was continued to be at your disposal. And Mr. Speaker, that's the first lesson that this Parliament must understand, and that those within earshot of my voice must understand and grapple with, because it is the ancient question that has humbugged nascent and unsuspecting and unthinking people across Barbados and across the Caribbean for centuries, Mr. Speaker, sir. The question is, how did slaves in a system that defined them as property come to own and possess and trade in property? That is the question. How does a slave that is defined as property come to own property, possess it, and trade in it, even though you yourself are property? And Mr. Speaker, sir, the answer lies in the fact, in the case of Barbados, that in spite of being a slave, in spite of being defined by the law as a slave, in spite, sir, of the structure of the slave economy that locked you into that position, that human spirit, that indelible spirit that is born in man, Mr. Speaker, sir, that commercial impulse to which I previously referred, continued to live on. And Mr. Speaker, sir, the slave, despite being a slave, was also an economic agent. He planted, he reaped surplus, and when he was in a position, sir, to utilize his surplus, he did it for commercial purposes. And that, sir, is borne out by Professor Hilary Beckles in an excellent piece of work, which is called Slaves and the Internal Market Economy of Barbados, a Perspective on Nonviolent Resistance. And he says that the Barbados experience differed somewhat from Jamaica in size and nature. Here, slaves had no provision grounds.
Honourable, you have that extract.
Pardon,
correct?
sir?
You have the extract.
I have the extract. And I am quite happy to make it a document of the House for the elucidation and perusal of other honourable members.
That would be much appreciated.
Yes, sir. And I read at page 17 from it, Mr. Speaker, sir. And Professor Beckles is saying that though we were different in size from Jamaica and in nature, because in Barbados we had no provision grounds. And I should just simply stop the quote to make the point so that people understand. In Jamaica, because they had so much more land, it was actually possible for some slaves to have access to maybe a quarter acre of land to grow. But here in Barbados, they had a kind of space. And because we were the jewel in the English crown, every square inch that you could find in order to put into cane was put into cane, because the production level had to be high and kept going higher and higher. It got so high, in fact, Mr. Speaker, sir, that it is also part of the history, and the member for St. Peter takes great pride in the heritage of his constituency in this regard, that there came a point where they could not contain these slave masters here. Fellas get vexed and say, listen, we can't do business enough in Barbados. Give us the order in council it is, so that we can go to the Carolinas and transplant that which we do to the nascent lands of the Carolinas, the virgin soil in the Carolinas, thus giving the Carolinas the dubious distinction of being the first colony ever to be colonized by a colony, because Barbados colonized the Carolinas. A lot of people in this country don't know that, sir. But that's a reality. And the planters would have come, I think at least 2 or 3 of them came from in the parish and the constituency of the honourable member for St. Peter.
On a point of order, I would just like it to be said.
Honourable member for St. Michael East.
Yeah, I would just like it to be said that the Barbadian planter class colonized other persons, not the Barbadians. Yeah. The generic expression can create a lot of distortion on these specific issues.
The point is well made, honourable member. The point is well made. And therefore, sir, I go back to Professor Beckles' treatise. And he goes on to make the point, sir, that here in Barbados, slaves had no provision grounds. They were fed from the master's stocks, which were both imported and locally produced. Imported salt meat and plantation-grown grain. And note, sir, imported salt meat. I can come to that too. And plantation-grown grain were allocated to slaves by the overseers, sometimes on a Friday night, but mostly on Sunday morning. All these slaves had was a little house spot, generally no more than 15 square yards, on which to root their autonomous production and marketing activity. They could not therefore be defined as anything more than petty proto-peasants. And yet the vibrancy of their huckstering enterprise was no less developed than that in Jamaica, where slaves cultivated acres of land. Well, Mr. Speaker, sir, the fact of the matter is that in the slave yards of Barbados, we would have found that people were planting fruit and vegetables and raising stocks. Some would keep pigs, some would keep goats, sir, guinea fowls, ducks, chickens, pigeons, etc. And that surplus is what found its way into what is called the internal marketing system, sir. And there were, as I said, economic agents. People who, despite being in bondage and in slavery, functioned as part of commercial enterprise by distributing the surplus to which I have just referred. That is what finds, this is where this business finds its genesis. It is rooted, sir, in the ancient bowels of the history, the evolution of this country, Mr. Speaker, so that you would have, for example, and I think there were 5 basic types. There have been women, sir, and I paused to make another observation, because a lot of the activity was done by females. A lot of the leadership to vending, a lot of the resistance to keep going, to keep plodding on despite whatever difficulties, was led by females, Mr. Speaker, sir. May explain why there is such a large number of female vendors even today in this country and across this region. And, sir, you had economic agents who were responsible for distributing this surplus. You may have, for example, women who would have worked in the fields, sir, but they were in a position to sell items raised in their gardens to individuals. You would have had, Mr. Speaker, sir, people who sold their produce on their own account directly to the master or to the master's friends. It is also true to say, sir, that there were people who would have been domestics who would have sold on the streets in Barbados. It was a pattern that you sent your slave out on the streets in order to sell off some of the things that were grown on the plantation land, so that the domestic in the house, working in the big house, was given an opportunity on a Sunday to go out and sell some of the things. And Mr. Speaker, sir, equally, it is true to say that you can find engaged in a lot of petty traffic slaves who would have been managing retail shops on their master's account. All through the bar, I almost said here because we are not where we used to be. If we were in Bridgetown, I would say all through the streets of Bridgetown. That happened. All through the streets of Bridgetown. Female slaves running shops and selling on the master's account. And then, of course, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is that which we all grew up and saw. Those people who would have been selling on the street corner, sitting on stools, sometimes sitting even on the ground, sir, selling provisions that they had been able to grow, obtain, and go on and to turn a dollar with. And Mr. Speaker, sir, this type of activity continued throughout all the years. But it brings us to the very second question, perhaps the most important question that challenged this society. How did a clearly evolved system of internal marketing, supported obviously as it had to be by the planter class themselves, suddenly get treated with hostility by a parliament that was comprised of the same planter class in large measure? And there's a very easy answer to that, sir. As I said at the beginning, I view this society through a lens, a prism of historical materialism. It is a fact that these things happen. And for us to educate and understand where we are going to go with any policy in the future, we have to understand how the economic impact on history, what impact that had, how the economic impact took place, understand how it is impacting us today in our current affairs, sir, if we're going to shape policy as we go forward in the future. Otherwise, we are going to be locked into just making knee-jerk reactions from time to time based on something that is dropped in our laps, because we haven't stopped to study these developments, Mr. Speaker, sir. And the challenge was and is to understand how an internal marketing system within a wider slavery economy comes to attract the hostility of a legislature throughout the years, a legislature made up of the planters, some of whom, Mr. Speaker, sir, would have been in their own private domain practicing and fueling the opportunity for this same vending to evolve. The answer, sir, lies in race and class considerations in this country. There were socially alienated, poor white people. Some would have come here as indentured servants, sir. They would have been vending, and they would have been adversely affected by the impulse and the business of black vendors. A lot of those people, sir, when your indentureship period was over, did not hop on a boat and go back to Ireland, did not hop on a boat and go back to Scotland. We know that in the constituency of the Honourable Member for St. John, we know that in the constituency of the Honourable Member for St. Philip North, we know, Mr. Speaker, sir, that in those parts of Barbados, there are still communities to be found which trace themselves back to that period of indentureship. And the fact of the matter is, sir, that during the 17th century, indentured servants and their descendants made their living by selling vegetables, which black people were selling. They made their living by selling produce, which black people were also selling. They made their living by selling meats. As I just indicated to you, sir, black people were also selling, because they're growing a goat, and you're growing your cows, and you're growing your pigs, and so on. And the surplus finding its way into the internal marketing system. But the collision took place in terms of race. And the appeal was made to this place that you preside over now, Mr. Speaker, sir. That's where we come into it. The appeal is made by the base of the white community in Barbados, not the big boys who would have been sitting in Broad Street and sipping whatever the drink back then, because they were unmoved by all of this. But at the base of the society, for the white construct, they're saying, but you can't do this. How do we maintain our pride of place? How do we maintain our sense of dignity in a society that is stratified, if you're going to allow slaves and persons who should be at the bottom to be able to deal with the benefits of commerce that we as white people should be getting first opportunity over? That was the question that was put before the House of Parliament several times, Mr. Speaker, sir. And then every time that the question was put before this House of Assembly that you preside over, Mr. Speaker, sir, the answer was that there is a need to control and to restrict black enterprise. And they did it time after time. I am indebted to the Honourable, to the learned clerk of the House, sir, for assisting me with the research that I needed to do. Because, Mr. Speaker, sir, I'm able now to capture, for the benefit of this House, some of the ways in which this Parliament of which we are part went out of its way in order to place obstacles in the path of working class people in Barbados. Mr. Speaker, sir, in 1688, they began with a slave code. A slave code that was designed specifically to prohibit all Negroes from carrying goods from home to home. That is the first one, 1688, 333 years ago. Again, 333. Designed to prohibit Negroes from carrying goods from home to home. So that the itinerant nature of vending, and we grew up in a Barbados where we saw it. We grew up in a Barbados where we would see a man come through the village, right through the district signs on a bicycle, he got fish selling. Somebody walked through with a tray. They got mangoes and fruits and so on selling, Mr. Speaker, sir. Lettuce and so on. That itinerant culture, Mr. Speaker, sir, went all the way back to 1688. But the Parliament of which we are a part deliberately intervened with the slave code to put a stop to that. Then, Mr. Speaker, sir, in 1694, a bill was brought into this chamber. We celebrated, sir, we celebrated the 350th anniversary of this thing. We get big, long jump up and thing, 350th anniversary of Parliament. Not a fella in pause to reflect on the oppression of the Parliament. Not a fella in pause to reflect on the atrocities that came through this Parliament. But we celebrate it nonetheless. And in 1694, sir, the bill that I'm talking about was to prohibit the sale of goods to Negroes. So that you then, when you couldn't stop them from moving from house to house, Mr. Speaker, sir, you said, well, look, if we can't stop you from moving about, what we can do is make sure you don't get access to the goods that will allow you to become an itinerant vendor. And at every stage of the way, Mr. Speaker, sir, the descendants of the people that we represent rebelled and resisted in spite of their bondage. Mr. Speaker, they come back again in 1708. An act was passed to prohibit the inhabitants of this island from employing a Negro or any slave in selling and bartering. And that goes back to the point I made about Bridgetown. It goes back to the point I made about Bridgetown, that there were white people who owned shops, but they would put a slave of theirs to run the shop. We've heard stories, sir, about Rachel Pringle, for example. We hear these stories. And again, laugh at it. Because we're taught to believe that this was a broad backside woman that ain't had no sense, that did about prostitution and so on. We don't understand the commerce that she was involved in. We are not encouraged to think about the commerce she was involved in. It is a level of ignorance that is foisted upon the society by people who want us not to recognize the gems of commercial entrepreneurship that sprung from the bowels of the people of Barbados, the working class people of Barbados, sir. We've been encouraged to sing the foolishness King Jaja and let back alone. Not understanding that the same King Jaja that you're talking about is a man who was connected to commerce here and back in the African continent. Nobody paused to tell any of that. I didn't know. I went through school, primary school, and I encouraged to sing it, but nobody stopped to say, but let me tell you the story of King Jaja. Because that is what we have done. That is why I say, Mr. Speaker, we are dismantling the last vestiges of a slavery economy. Because part of the structure, the power structure buried deep in this country, sir, is that you must disconnect the psyche of black people from the success of black people and black civilization. That's what we are trying to tackle here now. And Mr. Speaker, sir, in 1749, another act was passed to prevent what they call Negroes from assembling in huckster shops. 1751, they call this the law to administer sore backsides. That's what was written into this chamber, sir. A law to administer sore backsides. 21 lashes publicly laid on from the hangman or the constable if the Negro was found selling. You think it is now, sir? Well, in my lifetime, in fact, Mr. Speaker, sir, in the lifetime of every honourable member of this chamber, Bridgetown was the scene of dogs being used to forcibly remove the vending community from locations in Bridgetown where they sold. That is a fact, sir. In the lifetime of every honourable member of this chamber, that did not end, sir, in 1751. I go further. In 1774, an act to better prohibit goods and merchandise and other things from being carried, once again, from being carried to house or about the roads and streets in this island for the purposes of sale or bartering or to be disposed of, and to remedy the mischief and inconvenience arising to the inhabitants of this island from the traffic by huckster slaves, free Negroes, and mulattoes. And I am glad that they added in mulattoes there, because there are many people whose skin a little clear, who feel that, nah, this ain't got nothing to do with them. Even as I speak, even as I spoke today, there would have been stoops in the mouth. That ain't got nothing to do with we with this boat. Not understanding the connection, Mr. Speaker, sir, that carries with it all of the psychological damage, the economic lack of opportunity, the downpression, the suppression of talent, the suppression of commercial instinct, Mr. Speaker, not understanding how all of that impacts on us. And the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, that we can't seriously look at a young generation in the eye and tell them that Barbados is theirs to be the best that they can be. This is all part of it. It can't be that it is the best that you can be if it is that it is your dream to be able to sell. And I say this now, not because I'm on the floor of this house, sir, but I speak from that which I have seen and felt on the eve of Christmas last year. I went to 6 Road, St. Philip, and saw a little girl standing on the sidewalk next to a row of pink bicycles. And my little daughter came immediately to my mind when I saw these bicycles, because pink is her favorite color. And I said to myself, well, Kenya would love one of these bicycles. And yes, Kenya is my daughter's name. I walk the walk, I don't just talk the talk. My son is named Kofi. They both carry names that connect them psychologically to the continent of their ancestry. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I stopped the car, and I pulled over, and I went and talked to the little girl. I said, well, where is your father? Who here working with you? I controlling this daddy doing something else. This girl could not be more than about 12, 13 years old. I was taken aback. I genuinely was. And she was speaking with confidence and certainty. She controlling it. So I told her what I wanted to do and so on. I'm just teasing out of her how she can handle this business transaction. She was able to tell me that the seats could adjust. She was able to tell me that it could get training wheels with the bicycle, so that's no problem if the little girl can't ride good yet. She was able to tell me all this. I said, but tell me something. How long have you been doing this? I used to come and help my daddy all the time. And I asked her the question that came to mind. What do you want to do when you grow up? You know, she didn't tell me nothing about a doctor, nor an architect. She said, I want to sell things. I want to sell things. It is a legitimate ambition, Mr. Speaker, sir. She wants to sell things. It is a legitimate ambition. And at the core of it, sir, what do any of the millionaires out there, the big names that we like to follow, they're going to the States, sir, and, well, not everybody. Those who have a more meager pocket like me, we're going at Walgreens, but that's a big name. But them a family that make enough money out of selling things. Huh? Here in Barbados, we like to pack into a place that called KFC, but started by a man who only wanted to sell chicken, a man named Sanders. Mr. Speaker, sir, the whole world is about selling things. But we can't encourage a spirit of entrepreneurship in the bellies and the minds, the hearts of our young people, if it is that spirit of entrepreneurship has to collide with a brick wall called a criminal sanction and a criminal penalty. So it is all right for those people who feel that they're hired up now and bettered off, that they can scoff at the backlash of history. It no longer matters to me because I am out of that. I can scorn the base degrees by which I did ascend. But, Mr. Speaker, sir, for those of us who have to deal with constituencies and constituents who on a day-by-day basis feel that they have no choice than but to become entrepreneurial, Those people, sir, who, for example, 2 years ago were contented to work in a hotel. But through COVID, that hotel shut down and today still has not reopened. They still have to find a way to pay a bill. They still have to find a way, Mr. Speaker, sir, to feed a family. They still have to find a way, Mr. Speaker, sir, to keep a roof over their head, keep a vehicle on the road. And that is why in your constituency, sir, and in mine, and in the constituency, I dare say, of every member of this House, you have seen growing up in different areas, on street corners, people who are coming out to vend, to engage in entrepreneurial activity. Because in the end of the day, sir, it is, as the Honourable Member for St. Michael East would tell you, a struggle for survival. And for a lot of those people who feel that they are above it and beyond it, they need to be reminded that when you're on demand's paycheck and on demand's payroll, very often you're only 2 paychecks away from being right back there where you have to struggle for survival. So the fight for us in this government, sir, must be to bring dignity to that which the people are doing, to bring, Mr. Speaker, sir, a sense of opportunity that allows them now to be empowered and enfranchised in that which they are doing, sir, and to remove the shackles that have been imposed on that commercial activity throughout the annals of time. I make no apology for saying it, that as a Minister of Commerce, sir, the only shame I feel is the shame on behalf of successive administrations. For 55 years, they did not find it possible to come here and do that which we now do today. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, I go further. I'm not done yet. There's an act in 1811, an act to clear Swan Street, if you please. Huh? Mr. Speaker, sir, you want me to say it again? An act to clear Swan Street. All black vendors to be removed from Roebuck, Swan, and Broad Street and reassembled in an area called the Shambles. You think it is only now, Mr. Speaker, sir, that selling in Broad Street was a problem? In 1811, Mr. Speaker, sir, that's what the Parliament of this country was invited to come and do, and did. And there are people in Barbados today, do not fool yourself, who would prefer to see a Swan Street without a vendor. That is a fact. And the challenge that this government has, sir, is to make sure that there is an accommodation and a mutuality of access, a mutuality of opportunity, because it cannot be a country, it cannot be an economy in which there are certain areas partitioned off for certain people to the detriment of others, especially to the detriment of the numerical majority in this country. Especially to the detriment of the numerical majority in this country. But these conversations make people uncomfortable, Mr. Speaker, sir. These conversations make people feel that we are going too far and that you need to pull back a little bit, as they would say, from the brink. The brink of what? The brink of carrying an underclass into an era where they are not getting privilege, they are getting equality and getting dignity. That's what it's about, Mr. Speaker, sir. That's what the brink is. Carrying an underclass, a class of downtrodden people, years of it, to a point where they are now being given an opportunity that they did not get and should have gotten through successive generations. Mr. Speaker, I'll go further. In 1905, we coming closer to where we are. A Friendly Society Act designed to stop friendly societies. And remember, the friendly societies were in possession of Panamanian money. Stop friendly societies from distributing dollars. Mr. Speaker, I don't want to laugh. I don't want to laugh. I laugh because of the fact that this really is an evolution. This is an understanding of how this parliamentary structure, the laws of this land evolved, and what the concerns were. that you wanted to stop people, sir, with Panamanian money from distributing the money and buying land, and that you impose a maximum space of 1 acre. So a man leaves Barbados and goes over to Panama. Many of them never came back. What were they called? The silver men. Many of them died in the trenches of Panama. Go over there not because they ain't got nothing better to do, or went over there because they're curious, or went over there because they're looking for women. They went over there, Mr. Speaker, to feed family and repatriate funding. And when they get back here, people who had no interest in those same people while they were here, have no interest in the well-being of the family while they were overseas trying to fend for them, make it their business to come into the Parliament of Barbados to say, don't care how much money you got, you can't buy more than an acre of land. Do you understand, sir, the absurdity of the evolution of this country? And that is why I began on the note I began, because it is a question of making sure that Barbados retains a semblance of stability. Because there had to come a time, this is a date with destiny, sir. There had to come a time when a government, a black government elected by the black people of Barbados, will come and speak truth about these atrocities and make sure that we start to correct them. Because that is what we did. It was nobody would have imagined that the white race in this country would have been told, and this is not a question of racial speech, this is a question of reality. Nobody would have empowered or allowed, imagined the white race or any part of it to be told that you can't buy more than an acre of land. That would be preposterous. It would be absurd. So what then makes it right? In 1905, for people to be saying to black people that you can't own more than an acre of land in Barbados. What makes it right? How is it justifiable, sir? But you're not supposed to have these conversations. But as the Commerce Minister, I feel, sir, that I had a duty to share with you that historical background, because that historical background, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that which has created the structure that we are confronted with today. And as I said, it is within the living memory of every member of this Parliament. It ain't nothing that somebody had to tell any member. All of us are young enough to know and to have been alive when vendors in Barbados were forcibly moved from places where they were operating. All of us are young enough to know that we were alive, and we know the way in which the movement took place. It was a movement without consultation with the vendor. It was a set of circumstances in which that community would have come to work in a particular area, for example, at Bridgetown. And by 10:30 in the morning, your whole day is turned upside down because 2 van loads of police pull up in front of you. That which you were selling is skinned over in the road as though it was worth nothing, though you may have spent $500 to $1,000 or more in trying to acquire it. The police boats mash up your fruit. Your vegetables kick away. And in the accompaniment of animals, dogs to be specific, Mr. Speaker, these people are forcibly moved from where they were, without reference to whether or not the place that they are to go to. In some cases, there was no place designed for them to go to anyway. But without reference to whether the place they were being removed to is a place from which they could realistically expect to get $1. Now, how do you treat a section of the society in that way, Mr. Speaker, sir, and not remedy it? So therefore, as part of the manifesto commitment of the Barbados Labour Party, we said to the country that if you give us your support, we would be prepared to intervene in order to do right by these people who history, who a sense of decency, who a sense of morality dictate must be done right by. And the time, Mr. Speaker, has come for us to do that. Now I want to make it very clear, sir, that which I propose to this House today, you are hearing it from the Minister for Commerce, the Member of Parliament for St. James Central. You are hearing it on the terms of the Member of Parliament for St. James Central. It has been given the blessing of the Cabinet of Barbados. But we are saying equally, the Cabinet has told me, and I must now tell you, sir, that the Member of Parliament of St. James Central can have the final say, that this has to be given further ventilation so that the vending community may have input beyond that which they would have already had by way of discussion and consultation. The vending community must not be the only people to have input, but that other entities in Barbados who are concerned with other considerations will have an input. And so therefore, sir, this goes to a select committee of the House for a period of 2 weeks or 3 weeks to give people an opportunity to come and present evidence. If you have views on the proposals I am going to outline, Mr. Speaker, sir, those views will be heard and factored into the equation. I am not digging my heels in and saying this is rooted in concrete. In other words, I am saying that this is a standard to which I want this country to now hold itself with respect to this part of commercial activity in Barbados. And if there are people who have ideas as to how it can become even better, I welcome those ideas. If there are people, Mr. Speaker, sir, who feel that we are going too, what's the words that they use? They say you're going too far, too fast. To them, I have already answered what my position is. So I ain't going to tell you doing right, but you don't know what my thinking is on that. There's never a bad time to do the right thing. But Mr. Speaker, sir, we are inviting constructive comment and input. Even from past administrations who chose to do nothing about this matter. Now, sir, the vending bill is seeking to regulate vending activities across all theaters of practice in Barbados. And what do I mean by that? It is important for you to understand, Mr. Speaker, sir, that under the provisions of the Markets and Slaughterhouse Act, which is another antiquated piece of legislation, tracing its way back, I'm not sure how many years, but it has to go back a long, long time. We governed the markets, the public markets that are not fish markets, by the Markets and Slaughterhouse Act. And we know, obviously, that vending takes place in the market. As you have seen every day of your life, Mr. Speaker, sir, you drive along Barbados and you're seeing vendors alongside the road. You see them alongside the highway, etc., etc. And, Mr. Speaker, the Markets and Slaughterhouse Act is supposed to regulate their activity as well. I will not, from this place, comment on how effective or ineffective that regulation is, but I think that anybody viewing it from the naked eye and applying an element, a basic element of judgment, would realize that there's a lot that could be done, even if only by way of trying to make vending along the corridors of our highway a safer experience for the vendor and for the consumer. But Mr. Speaker, sir, beyond the public markets and the Markets and Slaughterhouse Act, there's fisheries markets. And the fish markets, Mr. Speaker, sir, is populated, occupied by vendors. And that is governed under a different regime, which falls under the Ministry of Maritime Affairs and the Blue Economy. Vending also takes place, though, on fish landing sites. And a fish landing site is not a fish market. And at the fish landing site, there's another regime which deals with vending at that point. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, that gives us 3 areas. Another theater of activity, sir, is on the beaches and in the esplanades and in the parks of Barbados. And that, sir, and in the gardens. And that, Mr. Speaker, sir, is governed by the National Conservation Commission, which has built out its own independent regime, and which clearly says to all who care to read the legislation that the National Conservation Commission must retain the right to look after the development of our beaches, the management of our beaches, the management of the flora and fauna, etc., of the beaches, all of those environmental considerations, the allocation of space on the beaches, etc. And so therefore, sir, the challenge that we have was to find a way to bring together a harmonious and an equitable arrangement, which will see a management regime across all the departments of government dealing with all of the theaters of activity, but which will be harmonious in the way in which it treats the vendors, offering vendors of every type in every place, in every space of this country, part of the New Deal in equal measure. So that no vendor, irrespective of where he or she operates from, is to be left behind. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, it may have been that the Herculean nature of that task was too much for previous administrations, and so they didn't bother. It may equally have been that involved inherently in that task are core considerations about the quality of work. And let me be very frank with you. Quality of work of the vendor is another matter that this country has chosen not to speak to. You know, I marvel, sir, I marvel at some of the nonsense on tall stilts that can happen in Barbados. Because you can have people crying from the rooftops, making all sorts of noise. And I have no difficulty with the argument that if the air condition in a building is not circulating properly, then you have a problem with the environmental circumstances internal to that building. But Mr. Speaker, sir, these same people every day would pass along a highway and see a man working on that highway, and that man has no access to a bathroom facility. He has no access to a place to wash his hands, Mr. Speaker, sir. He has no access to a place where he can rest comfortably for 5 minutes. And body in a sinning. But that's occupation too. That's work too. That impacts the quality of work too. And these same people, Mr. Speaker, sir, would drive past an agricultural field. Then that's why I say that, you know, when I hear the comments made, the reckless loose talk by unthinking critics who feel that politics is just about finding something to nitpick at without having a philosophy to guide you and a philosophical intent. When I look at the Honourable Member for St. Philip South and his intervention in the agricultural sector to be the first Minister of Agriculture, sir, who has come and recognized and been prepared to do anything about it. Because I don't think he could be the first to recognize, but certainly he's the first to do anything about it. Where you have people laboring in a field, Mr. Speaker, the mothers of this nation, the daughters of this nation, laboring in a field from 4 a.m. morning. What do they do when they have to heed a call of nature? When a visitation of a monthly nature takes place, what is it that they are supposed to do? And the circumstance in which they work, Mr. Speaker, sir, is fundamentally no different from that which obtained in the plantation hegemony of 1688. But we need to say these things because these are not people too. Their circumstances are not supposed to be discussed in lofty places like Parliament. Their circumstances, Mr. Speaker, sir, do not ever resonate in the corridors that we call chambers of commerce. I hear about all sorts of partnerships, social and other. I don't hear these things being talked about, though. And this administration, arguably the most progressive of administrations since the independence of this country, has intervened to correct that. but the knee-jerk reactionaries among us, motivated by considerations other than pure well-being of the people, will find it possible to nitpick here and there, but do not ever collide with these fundamental improvements in conditions of labor. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, let me not be distracted by that. Let me go back to where I am, because part of this discussion on vending must also be the conditions in which vendors work. It is an inescapable part of the dialogue. And, Mr. Speaker, sir, the legislation will do a number of things, and I want to be able to, or it is proposed that the legislation will do a number of things, and I want to be able to take the House through some of the key components of this new deal. Sir, Clause 5 of the legislation is going to prescribe methods to be taken for obtaining licenses. And vendors may be issued licenses by the Minister of Commerce after consultation with the Minister of Agriculture and the Ministry of Fisheries. And that is because, sir, as I indicated, we are trying to bring harmony across pre-existing theaters of activity. The giants who led this country, the giants on whose shoulders we stand upon today, that led this country after Barbados was independent, did not give thought to a day such as this, in which the vending community and the business of the vending community, which continued to evolve year after year, expand year after year, they didn't give thought to the day that we would have to harmonize all the vending in Barbados. So the challenge facing this administration, on whose shoulders it now falls to correct so many of the mistakes of past administrations, we now have to decide how best and how most effectively to do this. Does it make sense? And in my judgment as Commerce Minister, it does not. Does it make sense to dismantle the National Conservation Commission's pre-existing arrangements and start afresh? Because if you do that, how then do we govern in the interim those things that are being done by the National Conservation Commission? And that must be done. And how does, more importantly, how does the National Conservation Commission finance itself? Because it is through the licensing processes that the National Conservation Commission finances itself. And equally, Mr. Speaker, sir, can we dismantle all that is happening in agriculture and oversight over public markets? Can we dismantle that which is happening in fisheries? And Mr. Speaker, we say no. What we can do is to commit ourselves to interdepartmental cooperation, which is a more sensible way of government, which is a way of government which is more in accordance, quite frankly, with the Labour Party way. Because, sir, there was a period of time, as you well know I don't have to remind you, sir, when written documentation happened to fall into the public domain under the hand of a Minister of Agriculture at that time who was also from St. Philip, but this time in the western part of St. Philip. And he said, as I distinctly recall in writing, that no persons under his jurisdiction as minister were to attend any meetings convened by the minister responsible for finance unless he gave them specific permission to do so. And we all know that he was never minded to give that permission. So governmental interaction between the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Agriculture at that time, under that sordid, misguided administration, sir, that we hope will never see the light of day, such of them will never see the light of day again. Mr. Speaker, governance fell into a state of chaos. No, we can't have that. The Labour Party way is that I can maintain cordial relations and my permanent secretary maintain cordial relations with her counterpart in the Ministry of Agriculture and her counterpart in the Ministry of Fisheries. And Mr. Speaker, sir, that we deal with these matters of facilitating the business of the people in a way that mature people are expected to in a mature democracy. And that's one of the fundamental differences in approach. No, sir, It therefore means that the Minister of Commerce will be able to issue the licenses irrespective of where you are vending after consultation, so that I know from the Division of Fisheries, well, we have in this particular fish market here in Oistins, we have 10 spaces available. So therefore, Minister, it would be imprudent to consider offering 12 licenses because we have 10 spaces. So you know what you can do. Similarly, sir, if you're going into a public market in Eagle Hall, the Ministry of Agriculture will advise as to what is the capacity constraint, etc. That is the only way in which we can do it. Oh, Mr. Speaker, sir, with regard to the National Conservation Commission, they will be empowered to issue licenses independently because they and they alone have oversight over the beaches and the parks. But, Mr. Speaker, what they must do is to be able to keep the Ministry of Commerce abreast at all times as to the state of the licenses, how many you have, how many have been issued, to who they have been issued, so that we can have, sir, a register which sets out the details of the persons who are licensed to be vending in Barbados. Why does that become important, Mr. Speaker? It becomes important in my judgment because in the month of February, I can't remember the day, so I'm not going to mislead the House. In February of this year, when we determined that we were going to make an intervention to assist micro businesses in Barbados that needed financial assistance after the forced shutdown, after the pause, sir, in economic activity because of COVID. Not that we forced people to do nothing. COVID forced us to be in a position where we had to pause economic activity. And Mr. Speaker, sir, after that intervention, we then said, well, we want to assist these businesses. That is the Labour Party way. It is not a type of approach to governance that was replicated widely across the Caribbean. But we did it. We found the money in spite of an IMF program, in spite of the restrictions of an IMF program, to be able to ensure that micro business people in Barbados were getting assistance. It may not all have come as fast as we would like, Mr. Speaker, sir. It may not all have come at one time as we would love, Mr. Speaker, sir. But you know, because you presided over my coming here in this place, and the Honourable Member for St. Philip North, when she chaired the committee, Mr. Speaker, sir, you can bear testimony to the fact that we came to raise more than $6 million to place at the disposal of micro business in Barbados. Now, sir, the challenge we had then, and I said it many times, the hard thing was to know who was who. There's a gentleman, Mr. Speaker, who have not been given permission to call his name, but he has been a most illustrious leader of the Barbados Association of Vendors. And Mr. Speaker, sir, he would tell you that I had to ask him, give me guidance as to how many you have in this particular space, in this particular area, in order for us to get an understanding of the numbers we are dealing with. Because part and parcel of the problem that we have had historically, that we fixed with this legislation, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that we are now going to create an electronic as well as a physical form register. And that will be available for all and sundry on a website, so that, sir, the public will know who it is that is registered to vend. If a vendor has been licensed, he knows where he can go to find out the state of his license. Be sure that he is on the list, so that if ever there's a need to intervene, again, to be able to offer financial assistance, you don't have to start from scratch. And that's what we were forced to do. As Minister of Commerce, I had to spend weeks trying to find out from agriculture, from fisheries, from NCC, what are the numbers we are talking about, so that we could assist people who legitimately needed to get assistance and would like to get the assistance almost immediately. The only way you can get the assistance immediately is if you know who they are. Because unfortunately, sir, we live in a society where, in spite of the fact that there are people who are legitimately in need, who are their vendors who go out there and toil night and day in order to put themselves in a position to feed their families. There were miscreants who found it possible to intervene, to say, well, I just do this here so too, though you've never done it a day in your life. Though you've never done it a day in your life. Though you come with a falsified identification number. Though you come, Mr. Speaker, sir, to hoodwink the system. And you cause a delay because we can't play foot fancy free and foot loose with the public purse. I am not going to do that. So we got to be sure, be dotting I's, crossing T's, and with every passing day, there are legitimate people who are humbled because we got brothers and sisters in this country who want to play games. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, the other area of significance is the area that arises with respect to revocation and suspension of licenses and varying of the terms of licenses and so on. Now, I say this is important, sir, because it is at this point that we introduce the New Deal. It is at this point that we change the game completely from that which people endured for the past 333 years. And we usher in a new administration and a new administrative structure for the operationalizing of vending activity in Barbados. The power exists, Mr. Speaker, for a Minister of Commerce in circumstances where he has discovered that someone has falsified information in the application process to revoke or suspend the license until you get yourself sorted out, get yourself right. Now, in those circumstances, it is quite possible that a vendor may decide that he is going to persist in vending. And he's going to be vending without having that license because the minister had revoked the license. So he decided, well, don't mind that, I can ahead and do what I want to do. For the first time, that will not be met. That will not be an offense. All along, if you vend without a license in Barbados, it's an offense. That's where the crime comes about. That's where the criminal law comes in. Historically, for 300 years. Now, Mr. Speaker, so we propose the introduction of an administrative penalty in which you are treated as having contravened the legislation. But that administrative penalty, as I said, is now creating a civil structure for treating to that breach of the regulations or that non-compliance with the regulations. And that I will elaborate on as I go further. But it replaces completely the criminal sanction that we knew before. That administrative penalty, Mr. Speaker, sir, will come in the form of a fine which will be levied against the vendor in question. And that vendor will be given a period of time within which to pay the fine. If the vendor chooses not to pay or fails to pay, that vendor then has held against him a liability to be pursued in a magistrate's court in a civil action, not a criminal action, a civil action for the recovery of that $500 that he didn't pay. So in other words, Mr. Speaker, sir, if I am a vendor and I owe $500 because I am vending without a license, then the way in which you treat to me is that you give me 14 days within which to pay my $500. I may say to you, well, Skipper, I ain't in a position to pay that $500 now because things too rough. I can't find $500 in 14 days. So I ain't paying nothing at all. In which case, then a matter is filed in the magistrate's court and you are expected by the magistrate to settle a debt that you owe to the government of Barbados in the sum of $500. And as we all know, those matters then are treated in a completely different way because you can attach that to your earnings. If it is that you earn $1,000 when the week comes, then we make a deduction of $100 every week for the next 10 weeks so that the government can get that which the government has to have. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, those are the areas where, by going to select committee, we invite the opinion of the practitioners in the field. We invite the opinion, Mr. Speaker, sir, of the magistrates who would have to superintend the process. We invite the opinion, Mr. Speaker, sir, of the wider public who may feel they have a relevant interest in the matter. But Mr. Speaker, sir, this is the new deal that we are trying to roll out. Because at all costs, what we have to do is to remove from the business of vending the scourge of criminality. Because as I have pointed out to you, Mr. Speaker, sir, there are people who occupy big up professions in Barbados who may be liable for far more than $500. In fact, Mr. Speaker, sir, you sit in a chair previously occupied by a person who was liable for far, far more than $500. Far, far, far more. I can't remember the multiple. It's too high for me to call. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, sir, nobody ain't attached no criminal penalty there. And if it ain't get attached there, it should not be attached down at the bottom. That's my position. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I feel equally that when we're talking about the rights of vendors, that I need to go into to do the House the justice of understanding what we are talking about specifically. If, as Minister of Commerce, I become appraised of the fact that a vendor in his application, for example, for a license, gave wrong information, I may be able to say, I wish to suspend this license until the application is corrected. But I cannot, Mr. Speaker, sir, in the proposed bill, I cannot arbitrarily, of my own accord, say, I am going to suspend this license. What I must now do is that I must give the vendor notice in writing that I intend to take this particular course of action against him or her. And I must indicate in writing the reasons why I intend to take this particular course of action. And I'm done yet. And that vendor must be given 14 days within which they can object in writing, saying, Minister, you are not to take this course of action in our judgment or in my judgment because of the following reasons. For the first time, Mr. Speaker, this Parliament of Barbados is not intervening in order to suppress the interests and the commercial impulse of the vendor, but the Parliament is intervening to grant the vendor rights, which allow him to know why an action is being taken against him, which allow him to have an opportunity to respond to the intention to take an action against him. Unprecedented. But Mr. Speaker, sir, again, these are the areas that we invite the input of the wider community who can assist us in making this process even more just. I have no interest in those who want to suppress it. Let me say that now. But if you can make it more just, then I'm interested in hearing that. Mr. Speaker, sir, the provisions also allow for the establishment of vending zones. And I'm particularly enthusiastic about this, Mr. Speaker, sir. Picture in your mind's eye, if you will, the ABC highway, where at intermittent points along that highway, the hard shoulder, sir, is extended to the left of the highway. And you pull off of the highway on a parallel pathway of travel. And along that pathway of travel, Mr. Speaker, sir, all of the, let's use the argument for analogy, the coconut vendors. All of the coconut vendors are now not scotched precariously on the side of the highway, as you will find on a Saturday and a Sunday in particular. But Mr. Speaker, sir, they are now off that traveled path just all you got to do is to put on your left indicator and you're on to this lay-by. That's the word I'm looking for. And along that lay-by, Mr. Speaker, sir, that is the vending zone. The vending zone now is lit so that vendors do not have to work during only daylight hours, but have the option, Mr. Speaker, sir, of working late into the night. Why is that attractive? I say it is attractive, Mr. Speaker, sir, on the basis of an experience that I shared with my friend, the Honourable Member for St. Philip West, when we were in Ghana. He would tell you, Mr. Speaker, sir, that we were treated rather well by the President of Ghana. And at his, as a matter of courtesy extended to us, he took us to that very historical place called the point of no return, where slaves would have been carried out to the ships and would never have been seen again. On the drive back up, we would have been driving for about 4 hours. 8 o'clock in the night, 9 o'clock in the night, heading back to the hotel, Mr. Speaker, sir, we are passing through markets. We are passing through markets teeming with vending activity. People coming out as if it was night cricket, Mr. Speaker. Families, lady carrying 3 little children behind her, seated, drinking coconut water, fruit juice, all made, all provided there on the spot. And I asked myself, why is it that we have so restricted the commercial opportunity in Barbados? But it don't make sense to me. Picture, if you will, Mr. Speaker, sir, a vending zone where we can now cure that misery that I referred to before, which is the unspoken debate and as unspoken issue in this country that nobody don't want to make contact with, that sanitary issue of conditions of work, where we have people who are going to work 9 o'clock in the morning in order to make provision for themselves, Mr. Speaker, sir, and they are in the business of distributing a beverage or a food. But, Mr. Speaker, sir, we as a government have up until this point not extended them the courtesy of running water. Are you asking me to believe, sir, that every day a vendor goes to work from 6 a.m. until 6 p.m. and at no time he or she needs to relieve himself or herself? Are you asking me to believe that, Mr. Speaker? Huh? We came to government. I forget it. I can't forget it. We came to government, sir. We came to serve the people of Barbados and confronted a situation in Temple Yard where there was a Ministry of Tourism that was telling people go down in Temple Yard and see the craft and so on. But when you went into Temple Yard, Mr. Speaker, sir, there was no running water. You went to Temple Yard, there was no light. But we were telling people that's our tourism product. Not for the purposes of tourism do I find fault with it, Mr. Speaker, sir, because don't get me started on that. Not for the purposes of tourism. I find fault with it because it is an exercise, a demonstration in gross inhumanity and disrespect to the people who are earning a living there. And that is one of the things that this government had to correct, and correct in a hurry. I feel, Mr. Speaker, sir, we got to get serious about these things. Establishing the vending zones is an opportunity now for us to be able to bring an element of dignity to a category of work that has been in keeping with the slave economy structure of this country, dehumanized. And we have been inoculated against sensitivity about that dehumanization with the passage of time. We see it so often before us, we see it so often with such frequency that you become desensitized about it. That it stops offending your senses, Mr. Speaker. And you accept it as a given, as a normal, as what should be. And we got to do better. In the same way that you're not going to ask anybody to go into a restaurant in Barbados and not be able to find a place to wash their hands or relieve their bowels, so too must it be that we come to a point where the vending zones in Barbados must be able to offer that same facility for the people who are working in them and patronizing them. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, the vending zones is only part of the New Deal and the rights. I go further. Clause 17 of the bill will see vendors having a 30 days period of notice before the imposition of an eviction or relocation can be made. Well, why is this important, sir? I've said before that it is the experience of all of us in this place that in our lifetime, we have seen people come to work in Bridgetown to do their legitimate enterprise of vending. It may be that they're in a location that they were not given permission to be in, or it may be that they're in a location that has become overcrowded. It may be that they're in a location where a person of a different racial extraction to them went and complained for them and made it seem as though they are causing a public inconvenience that had to be cured quickly. Because that too has happened in Barbados. Because that too has happened in Barbados. Where by virtue of hue and color and class, you are accorded a different level of reach to different places in the society. And we have seen, Mr. Speaker, sir, the constabulary of the Royal Barbados Police Force, to the best of my knowledge, without any court order, come in and saying, you got to move here now, though. And we have seen it being done in a manner that is not civilized because they come with the canine division. Not K9, but C-A-N-I-N-E. And Mr. Speaker, sir, we feel that that must never be a day that dawns again. So therefore, we say that if there is an issue that has arisen where there is need for an eviction or removal of a vendor or a group of vendors, that these people be treated as we treat any other business people in Barbados. That we give them notice, though, that we give them the courtesy of knowing that this is a development that is coming your way, that you can plan for it. Not that you come to work today and find that everything that you brought to work is destroyed, kick over, spill over, knocked out, without reference to recovery. And I come into recovery, Mr. Speaker. We feel equally that all vendors must be consulted in respect of any assignment of a new site, must be consulted in respect of any assignment of a new location, must be consulted, Mr. Speaker, sir, so that they will be able to have an input as to whether the proposed new arrangements are conducive to the carrying out of the particular business. So that the law that was passed all the way back, sir, in 1811 to clear Swan Street and reassemble people in an area called the Shambles will not be perpetuated, will not be replicated in Barbados ever again. Don't tell me it only happened in 1811. Do not tell me it only happened in 1811 because, what's the name of that place next to Cape Shepherd?
Rockers Alley.
Rockers Alley. I was alive, and that was in 1811. I was alive then. Mr. Speaker, sir, we feel equally that vendors are entitled to be able to reclaim any merchandise which is seized pursuant to the eviction or relocation notice. So you're relocating me from point A to point B after consultation. And I decide, well, look, I ain't about this moving thing. And obviously there has to be order. Obviously there has to be a balance. And in the event that somebody decides after the 30 days pass that he or she ain't moving, then there will have to be a relocation. But even in the circumstances of relocation, I must be able to be put in a position where I can reclaim my merchandise. But that's only fair because I pay for the merchandise. The merchandise has value. And you may be vexed with me as the state. And you may be entitled as the state to take certain action after all the consultation. The fact of the matter is, you must equally respect now the value of my merchandise. So if you've seized it and you're relocating it, then I need to be able to reclaim it. I know where I can go to reclaim it. And, Mr. Speaker, sir, I should elaborate further. We feel that the vendor is entitled to compensation in circumstances where there is a loss or damage or destruction of the merchandise which is subjected to the relocation exercise. Now, let me be clear. There are some provisions of the bill which contemplate a public emergency. At the meeting of the parliamentary group last night, I pointed out to my colleagues that the morning that we had a freak storm, when we were all going down to work, nobody anticipated that by 3 o'clock in the evening we can have a freak storm. So therefore, you may well have a set of circumstances arising where, out of public emergency, there is a need to move 15 vendors who are located in an area that is prone to flooding. And you have a flood watch issued, as one was issued yesterday for the north of the island. And today too. And you may have a flood watch out, and people say, oh Lord, you gotta move. Now in those circumstances, that is an emergency. You may equally have to move people, that's public safety. You may have to move people, sir, because of a public health issue or a public order issue. If those circumstances arise, however, and you do not therefore get the benefit as a vendor of getting your 30 days notice because it is an emergency situation. If you want to take up my things, then you must, as the state moving my things, be able to put them in a place where they are stored safely and where I am issued a memorandum which itemizes those things that you took from me. I sell t-shirts, and I sell face masks, and I sell some costume jewelry and coral shells and them things. So you have taken 50 coral shells from me, variety of colors, an assortment of colors. I want that written down. You have taken 14 t-shirts from me, sizes whatever, 3 in size whatever, 2 more in size whatever color. Want that written down. You describe that which you have taken and you put them in storage so that I can reclaim against the basis of the documentation issued. No doubt, there can be no doubt, because we have gone through that exercise of making sure an inventory is taken as you move my things. Well, Mr. Speaker, sir, unfortunately everything is not non-perishable, because many vendors sell fruit. Many vendors sell vegetables. Many vendors, Mr. Speaker, sir, would therefore be placed in a situation of peril financially if this could only apply to non-perishable items. So how then do we treat to the perishables? We say that within a 2-day period, if you have had, as a result of an emergency, to relocate me, I must have access to my goods. I must be told where they are stored. Let me go and get them. And it is your duty as the state to keep them in such a way that they have not spoiled or been damaged. No longer can it be that 40 unknown, unnamed police officers appeared on the bridge where I was selling my oranges, Mr. Speaker, sir, and skin over my tray, and that a police boot squashed the orange and kicked away the onions, and a whole dog bite too. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I am not in a position to recover. That I must be in a position to recover. And if the state does not put itself in a position to give me back those things that were damaged or destroyed, then, Mr. Speaker, sir, the state must compensate me for the value of that which was lost. That is the New Deal. That is the New Deal. So that every vendor living in the city of Bridgetown, Mr. Speaker, sir, must feel a sense of fulfillment today to know that when they go to take up their spot 6 months from now, 3 months from now, Mr. Speaker, sir, the things that they had to endure can never happen to them again. Mr. Speaker, we feel equally that there has to be a provision that above and beyond issuing the simple notices, that the notices must be particularized in such a way that is fair to the vendor. We spent a long time, I remember the meeting at which the Minister of Agriculture and his staff went through this in very careful detail with us, so that things that are important for you as a lawyer, if this had to go beyond just a simple resolution, you will want to know, sir, no doubt, the time of the seizure. You will want to know with specificity the nature of the things that were seized. You will want to know the location to which the merchandise was transferred, because there's a chain, sir, there's a chain of custody. Where did it go after it left Chamberlain Bridge? Who was in charge of it during the process where it was transported? Because that body, if he was an agent of the state, now puts the state in a position of liability. Not true, Mr. Speaker? Yes. So that for the first time, those considerations now apply to a class of people who were treated as though they were brutes, treated as though they were devoid of rights, who were treated as though they were devoid of commercial interest and a commercial benefit, Mr. Speaker. We do not represent communities of miscreants, sir. We represent communities of people. And this Parliament has taken 333 years to come to recognize the communities of people as entrepreneurs and working class Barbados. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, there is established under this bill a committee that will be known as an advisory board. And I, again, feel excited about this, because this brings us to an era that has been long in coming, which is really, how does the state work with the entrepreneur to make sure that there's the development of the entrepreneurial activity? This never fell from the lips of a Minister of Commerce in the history of Barbados before, Mr. Speaker, sir. How does the state work with the entrepreneur to make sure there's a development of this vending entrepreneur and his activity or her activity, Mr. Speaker, sir? So you have created a vending zone, but it can't stop so. Is there not, for argument's sake, a duty on the part of the state, as I am pleased to say, we are now exercising in conjunction with Barvin and in conjunction with the principal of the Barbados Community College and in conjunction with the principal of Samuel Jackman Prescott, Mr. Speaker, and yes, in partnership with the Chamber of Commerce and in partnership with the with the cooperative movement in Barbados. Mr. Speaker, sir, what is that about? It is a consultative partnership that I've evolved with a view to making sure that we can design stalls and place them in the same Swan Street, which will bring a level of uniformity and a level, Mr. Speaker, sir, at the same time of individuality to that which the vendors are doing, so that they can further enhance their work while at the same time making life a little bit easier in the interaction between them and the store owners in Swan Street. That's where my ministry is at right now. And Mr. Speaker, sir, as I think of vending zones across Barbados, I see vending zones about that developmental thrust as the advisory committee to the minister must now be an advisory committee that assesses the implementation of policies. It will be, Mr. Speaker, a committee that monitors and evaluates the achievements of the policy objectives. There will be a committee to advise on the upgrade of the vending zones. And by the upgrade, what do I mean? Let us not be so foolhardy as to believe that because you create a vending zone, and you may put some light and running water in it and a porta potty, that's the end of that. Because, Mr. Speaker, sir, we have to understand that commerce keeps rolling on, and that the time has come for us to to breach yet another bulwark that stands in the way of working class entrepreneurs in Barbados, which is to say, Mr. Speaker, so that we must make Wi-Fi accessible to them. That this task is not over until when I can go and buy my coconut water and pull out my cell phone, and that from my cell phone I can move money from my bank account to the vendor's bank account and carry along my 3 or 4 bottles of coconut water and go along back home. This task, Mr. Speaker, has not been satisfied until when we brought the technology to those people. But far from doing that, commerce in Barbados is lagging too far behind because the technology is not yet unfolded where I can use my cell phone, even in the heights of capital, even in the centerpieces of capital establishment in Bridgetown, Barbados, Mr. Speaker, sir. Tell me what store in Bridgetown, Barbados am I able to go and move money from my bank account off my cell phone at the point of sale as you do. I may be able to go and take it out of my bank account and move it to that person's bank account. But we all know that there are point of sale machines where in the other parts of the world you just swipe your phone over it and go along about your business. We are lagging in this country. So it is a journey that we are going to continue to take. Now that is something, that is one of the areas that have attracted the interest and captured the imagination and the attention of the Chamber of Commerce. Because that is called business facilitation in those corridors of capital power and capital interest. But Mr. Speaker, sir, there cannot be business facilitation defined only in the context of helping one segment of the economy. That business facilitation must extend to the vendors of Barbados who are at the base of the working class entrepreneurial effort. Because it is through that effort, sir, that micro business becomes small business. Through that developmental thrust, small business becomes medium-sized business, Mr. Speaker, sir, until when we can get them to an export stage platform. That's what this is about. But it has to start somewhere. So understand that when I talk about advising on the upgrade of vending zones, I'm talking about things like the sanitary and phytosanitary issues, Mr. Speaker, sir. If I were the member for Christchurch South, I would be anxious for the day that I could come to this Parliament and speak, as I now speak on behalf of the vendor who sells food at the bottom of Holders Hill, Mr. Speaker, who should be in a position to be able to say that all of the amenities and trappings associated with her endeavor are at the very best of standards, and that they have been made so, not out of her pocket, but out of the facilitation of her by the government of Barbados, which runs the fish market right next door. That must be said equally in Christchurch, in Oyston. We must dream, Mr. Speaker, big dreams of a day in which people can, Barbadians first of all, can walk into a fish market for lunch. This time so. I said to my friend Ralph, let's go in Oystons for lunch. Why do I eat that greasy food at that particular establishment there? I don't want that there. I'm not talking about them, my friend. I'm not saying you to eat any greasy chicken from the body. I'm telling you, let us go and pick out a fish. Let's select our fish and have it grilled right there on the spot. In the middle of the day. What happens? It happens in Europe, Mr. Speaker. It happens across Europe, sir. Why can't it happen in Barbados too? And if you feel, because there are some, and I'm being very brutally frank, Mr. Speaker, there are some corridors of economic thought in this country which feel that it is something that ought not to happen or should not happen for a certain category of people. But if you feel it ain't good enough for the category of people that you don't want to see benefit from it, I know you are greedy and thirsty to know that your tourism product from which you benefit will be able to have an additive. The tourism product is not only the hotel. The tourism product is not the hotel room. The tourism product is the experience of being able to go into the fish market of Barbados and be able to select that which we catch, to be taught how it is seasoned while you sit and wait on it to be grilled for you to eat. You are learning how you bone it and how you season it. That is the developmental thrust that we must be putting our entrepreneurial community on, Mr. Speaker. But we don't do that, and we don't do those things. And it is through this particular development in this bill where we will have the advisory committee advising on these matters, sir, whether it be stall design, sanitary, phytosanitary issues, Wi-Fi issues, and on and on. The opportunity is boundless. What shackles us, Mr. Speaker, sir, has been the political will. And this marks the first step in trying to make sure that that political will is executed. Mr. Speaker, there will also be an opportunity for persons who feel aggrieved by decisions of the minister or of any part of the process to appeal. And that appeal, sir, will be made to an appeals tribunal, which we propose will be a vending appeals tribunal headed by an attorney at law of at least 10 years standing. He or she, sir, will serve on that tribunal with a vendor equally of 10 years experience, and then one other person who is experienced and knowledgeable in the business of vending. May not have to be a vendor themselves, but has some connection and understanding of it. So that we can look at issues that are arising, sir, and make an appeal. When people make an appeal to the tribunal, they make a determination on the way forward. As I said before, contraventions of the legislation are going to be administratively dealt with. There is no criminal sanction whatsoever to any part of this legislation. Penalties, sir, are expected to be paid within 14 days of notice, and if an administrative penalty issued under this legislation for a contravention of any part of the legislation remains unpaid, it constitutes a debt to the Crown, and it is pursuable via the magistrate's court in a civil proceeding. So that you sue for the $500 or the $1,000 that you're supposed to get. The police have no business in this legislation, Mr. Speaker, for the first time in 333 years. The criminal court has no business in this for the first time in 333 years. As I said, Mr. Speaker, sir, this now will, I propose, go to a select committee for further consideration, further ventilation of views, because it is a democracy. And as I said, you have heard today the views of the member for St. James South. He has been given, St. James Central. I beg your pardon. Close to lunchtime. You've heard the member for St. James Central. And he has been given the benefit, Mr. Speaker, sir, of the imprimatur of the cabinet. But it is equally the cabinet's imprimatur that is saying this must be further discussed, and I have no problem with that. But I have laid out the bare bones, what I consider, Mr. Speaker, to be the skeletal framework, the minimum acceptable standard for this minister with respect to how we evolve this business. And I invite all and sundry who have an interest in it, Mr. Speaker, to share how this can be further evolved for the greater good, not for the placing impediments in the path of, but for the greater good of the vending community in Barbados as an area of commercial development in this country. Mr. Speaker, sir, there's one other area I wish to touch on, and that is that though it is not part of this legislation, it has been said to me by my colleagues, and I want to embrace on the floor of this House the view that we should go yet another step further, and that there should be an automatic and immediate expungement of all the criminal records associated with vending in this country. Mr. Speaker, sir, I am going to take advice from the Attorney General of Barbados. I will take advice from the Cabinet of Barbados. And we, again, because we go to select committee and we'll be hearing both oral and receiving written presentations, we invite the views of the public on this matter. This minister, sir, has no problem with the idea of the expungement of criminal records with respect to vending, and if it could be so done, I would be the happiest of campers. Mr. Speaker, sir, I feel that as it is now 12:30, I have done service to this legislation. I want to say that on a number of occasions today, sir, I spoke about the importance of us creating a Bill of Rights. From the very beginning, sir, I came and I said that we were coming here to decriminalize working class enterprise. I have repeatedly pointed out that we are creating a body of rights for practitioners of this level of entrepreneurship where no such rights had previously existed. And almost every time I hear that, Mr. Speaker, sir, I heard a distant rumbling. From time to time, I noticed, sir, from your reaction that you too seem to have heard that rumbling. I genuinely believe, Mr. Speaker, that the rumbling we heard was an echo of a refrain immortally put before the world by Bob Marley and the Wailers. I hear the voice of a Rasta man say, Babylon, your throne gone down, gone down. Babylon, your throne gone down. Mr. Speaker, sir, I am obliged. I beg to move that the bill be read a second time, sir.
Mr. Speaker,
Honourable Attorney General.
it is proposed that we should break for lunch at this time, so I wish to move that we adjourn the sitting until 1:45 or 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock.
The question is that this honourable chairman be suspended until 2 p.m. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This honourable chairman stands suspended until 2 p.m.